Good evening, good evening, good evening. It's time. Let me make sure all my things are in order. I think it's going to work for the first time, this live situation. I'm really excited. I'm going to give 1 to 2 minutes. So I know some folks are out there watching with me, listening in. Hopefully, you'll be willing to participate and type in your thoughts as I speak. Questions, engage. This is a co creation space. So excited. Welcome to Reprogram America, episode 3. All right. Thanks, hubby. Okay, good. So now that I know that you're on, so welcome to Reprogram America. My name is Natalie. The reason why I opened up this space and opened it in somewhat of a public setting as a social media stream is because kind of like the tagline says, reprogram America, co-create to stop the hate. I believe that big problems have come before us before, eradicating or getting rid of polio or, getting through a war period onto the other side. When you bring minds together and people together to co-create, I believe that we can tackle big issues. When you think about our challenges, when we talk about racial hatred in America, the biggest challenges that we have is that it seems sometimes insurmountable. So when I think about looking at problems like racism, problems like a caste system, I think about breaking it down into small pieces and tackling it bit by bit and coming together and talking to common-minded or not like-minded individuals to think about how we meet in the middle and come to solutions. So the idea of Reprogram America is about tackling racism, tackling racial hatred through tackling problems one piece at a time. So today's topic is on American exceptionalism versus group narcissism. American exceptionalism versus group narcissism. And I'm going to get into that a little bit in a minute. Just want to let you know that the reason why this is a live stream is because I want it to be a discussion. I want it to be engaging. So if while I'm talking or while I'm sharing something, I'm going to read a little bit from an excerpt from a piece and a little bit. If you feel moved to say something, share something, you have a thought or response, you disagree, you agree, please type it into the chat. I finally set up my stuff so that I can see all of the chats that come in and respond to them in a timely manner. So please do that. The purpose of today, when I talk about American exceptionalism, is not to argue whether or not America is in fact exceptional, right? Whether or not it's the greatest nation on earth. It's more to think about how we got there, and how our mindset to that end impacts how we interact with the rest of the world, and what that means from the people both inside and outside of America. So more of the focus is on the fact that, a large collective of people do believe that America is in fact the greatest nation in the world. Some might argue otherwise. And so what does that mean to the people inside and outside of the country? And then the discussion for today is also to focus on how that intersects or connects with group narcissism. And I'm going to define group narcissism in a minute from the excerpt. And then, assuming America is in fact the greatest nation, how did we get there? And which people had to be disenfranchised and left out of the equation, or stolen from, or eliminated even, through genocide in order for us to become that, right? And is that not an important thing to recognize in the course of our American history? Can you be American? Can you be exceptional as American, or think of American exceptionalism as fact? Be proud and patriotic in your country, and at the same time, be honest and truthful and reconcile with your country's complicated past, right? So I'm going to read something, my favorite book again, Caste from Isabel Wilkerson. This book is great, y'all. I encourage you to read all of it and over again. We're going to talk about group narcissism too. So in terms of narcissism, um, Wilkerson writes, we're accustomed to the concept of narcissism, a complex condition of self-aggrandizing entitlement and disregard of others, growing out of hollow insecurity as it applies to individuals. But some scholars apply it to the behavior of nations, tribes, and subgroups. Okay, so when you think narcissism, it's like Narcissus, the Greek guy that was staring into the pool of water, and he was so adoring and loving of himself that he died watching himself in this water, right? Narcissus could not conceive that he was in love with his own reflection. So he was kind of caught in this illusion. So too with groups trained to believe in their inherent sovereignty, the essence of this overestimation of one's own position and the hate for all who differ from it is narcissism. So this is part of the definition of narcissism, right? This was written by a psychologist and social theorist named Eric Fromm, you might be familiar with. He says, he is nothing, but if he can identify with his nation or can transfer his personal narcissism to the nation, then he is everything. So when you think about United States and our potential group narcissism, right? When you think about, people can't believe when people are voting against their own self-interest or their own, things that would support their family. When you're holding up this ideal of what it means or defining what it means to be American in a very specific way, sometimes it doesn't leave room for these other pieces, right? So I'm gonna go on and read a little bit more. The next part says, a person deeply invested in his group's dominance has a euphoric, on top of the world feeling, while in reality, he's in a state of self-inflation. Fromm wrote. This leads to severe distortion of his capacity to think and judge. He and his are over-evaluated. Everything outside of that is under-evaluated. And underneath may lie the fear that he cannot live up to the constructed ideal of his own perfection. So when you think about our country and how we interact with other countries, and our posture is always to go and kind of save the other country or to rise up to kind of to copy or emulate an American democracy, even though right now, you read in the news, our democracy could potentially be under attack, right? Depending on who is a translator. History has shown that nations and groups will conquer, colonize, enslave, and kill to maintain the illusion of their primacy. Their investment in this illusion gives them as much of a stake in the inferiority of those deemed beneath them as in their own presumed superiority. The survival of the group, Fromm wrote, depends to some extent on the fact that its members consider its importance as great or greater than that of their own lives, and furthermore, that they believe in the righteousness or even superiority of their group as compared to others. So when we talk about white supremacy or the idea of one group or race being more superior than others, part of when you vote against your interests, when you're in a group that's considered like a poorer group or a group that would need access to healthcare or a group that would need access to social services. I just got out of this amazing 3-day training with the People's Institute called Undoing Racism. Strongly recommend it. And they talked about this idea of the welfare queen and how it was created during the Reagan years to talk about who is the highest level user of our social services, our welfare, healthcare, SNAP, food stamps, etc. And so it was the idea that it was this Black single mom, right? However, in statistically speaking, the largest beneficiary of social services and welfare is the white woman. But because we have narratives that we have to support and create in order to make a certain group feel part of this superiority and to maintain our group narcissism, we often kind of lose sight of truth, right? So this, I'm closing in on the last parts I'm going to read. So it says, thus, when under threat, this is like the group narcissists, are willing to sacrifice themselves and their ideals for the survival of the group from which they draw their self-esteem. The social theorist Sakurai wrote bluntly, group narcissism leads to people to fascism. An extreme form of group narcissism means malignant narcissism, which gives rise to fanatical fascist politics and extreme radicalism. And I'm going to skip to a part on leaders, the types of leaders that group narcissists feed off of. So Fromm said, the working class to be among the most susceptible, harboring an inflated image of itself as the most admirable group in the world, and of being superior to an other racial group that it singled out as inferior, he wrote. A person is in this group feels, even though I am poor and uncultured, I am somebody important because I belong to the most admirable group in the world. I am white, or I am Aryan, if you think about the days of Hitler. A group whipped into narcissistic fervor is eager to have a leader with whom it can identify. So here's the leader. The leader is then admired by the group, which projects its narcissism onto him. And the right kind of leader can inspire a symbiotic connection that supplants logic. The susceptible group sees itself in the narcissistic leader, becomes one with the leader, sees his fortune and his fate as their own. And the greater the leader, the greater the follower. The narcissism of the leader, who is convinced of his greatness and who has no doubts in precisely what attracts the narcissism of those who submit to him. So that's all I'm going to read. So when you think about group narcissism, and I'm not going to name the leader, but you can imagine, right, who and how the leadership in our country plays into that group narcissism. So what does this do to us, and kind of how do we counteract that? So reprogramming America, the idea of these discussions and this conversation is on not only where the problems are, but how do we solve or move towards a solution? Or how do we change the narrative, or how do we create truth? So I talked about kind of American exceptionalism. So how did we get to the place where many believe we are the greatest nation on earth? Part of that is, we had a head start by what's it called? I can't even call it a head start. We came, when our country was founded, it was founded on a system, even the land that we lie on belong to others that were disregarded. So when you think about indigenous people and Native Americans who tilled the land, who honored the land, and then people came in, Europeans came in with weapons and were able to drive them out of the land, murdering many and eliminating many along the way. So when we think about indigenous people, those that remain and those that hold the culture, that were pushed into reservations, they were all over the land, right? So in order to become exceptional, or in order to become the greatest nation on earth, we had to first take it from someone else, or a group of people. And then we needed labor. We learned from that group of people the art of farming and the medicinal and the addictive qualities of tobacco, right? And so we learned from the indigenous people of the power of tobacco. And then we found that we could make profit and money off of this, rich mineral, and so we needed labor to work the field. So we brought in indentured servants. So we brought in people from Europe. Before people became white, they're Irish people, and We brought in African people from Europe to, I mean, not African people from Africa, European of the lower caste from Europe to work the land, right? To make money off this tobacco. And once the money was seen as good, they had to kind of create structures around this, right? So the indentured servitude became achievable to exit for the Europeans, but became lifetime sentences for Africans, and turned into the enslavement. And so the art of the act of enslavement of African people was what led to this greatness. If you have free labor for 400 years to work and help you build profit of first tobacco, then cotton, then sugar. When you think about the Caribbean, that's how you become the greatest nation on earth. And so part of the challenge of, when we talk about this history, right? The history that is not as beautiful, the history that is not as colorful, American history, when we think about, the 1619 project versus the 1776 project, right? 1619 is when the first Africans landed on American soil, and kind of the igniting of and the enslavement of African people. To eliminate that from our history and the history of our children is kind of like an abomination on our young people. It's a refusal to tell the truth. When we think about other caste systems, Germany, in South Africa, they learn about the good, the bad, and the ugly of their history. When we think about reconciliation, when we think about ending racism or eliminating racism, the first step into that is telling the truth. And so our challenge in America has been telling the truth first and foremost. So one of the things we can do when we think about reprogramming America is taking the time to learn the truth that is not taught in our school systems, and teaching our children that truth, teaching our children about the everything that happened in the founding of the country, what parts of it were good and what parts of it were bad, what parts of it hurt human beings, and what had to happen for them to have the opportunities that they have in front of them. I think that's really important. So I'm going to pause there. I don't know, there's a few people watching. If anybody have any thoughts or comments on, what I shared, what I read, what I said on group narcissism or American exceptionalism, and what those terms mean to you, was what I shared accurate, true? Do you want to challenge it? Are there ways to reverse it or reprogram it so it's more productive? Are there ways that you've discovered that work for you to tell the truth about our American history? Please feel free to type into the chat. I'm happy to engage you. Anybody? That's okay too. That's okay too. If you don't have anything yet. Yeah. So another thing I wanted to mention is, when we think about narcissism and group narcissism, one of the challenges is that if you believe that you're the greatest on earth, if you believe that, American has already arrived and is the greatest on earth, then what room do we have to improve or get better, right? Part of getting better, part of reprogramming America in the way we think, is accepting the fact that we are perfectly imperfect, and that we still have work to do, right? Recognizing that racial hatred manifests itself in oppressive systems. As Americans, we would have to understand that there are problems in our systems. Our systems are broken. But if we are the greatest nation on earth, then nothing can be broken, right? Thank you, Erica. You said you agree. There is a need to be truthful about the real effects of the systems and actions of the past, right? And so being truthful, I think, is a big piece. And then the other piece is also educating ourselves on that truth, and sharing it with our young people, right? As adults, we still have to transition our mind and reprogram our mind, but young people and children, their minds are still being molded. And so what they believe to be true is what we tell them as adults. And so doing our part to not omit parts of the truth is really huge. And and to know that they are strong enough as babies, as children, as young people to handle the truth, not thinking they're not too fragile. They're not, because if we don't tell them as their parents, as the adults in their lives, they're gonna find out, or they're gonna find out misinformation from social media or their friends or other people. So you want to make sure, no matter how hard it is or uncomfortable, that we're telling the truth. Erica says, but one funny thing about America is that they have this cognitive dissonance. They believe they are the greatest on earth, but still do make room for confronting the terrible things, that have happened. Some segments of our society do acknowledge there are problems in our system. There are many other countries that don't do this. I think the thing missing is that while we acknowledge we have work, we don't do it, so we stop short. Yeah, that's big, Erica. Let's unpack that a little bit. And Amber, I'm coming to you next. Thank you. So you said there are some segments of our society who do acknowledge it. So I think the challenge or the question is, how do we expand the segments, right? And how do we make it? And sometimes I feel like the segments can be politically split, right? Maybe the liberal segment will be more, look at it a little bit more than the conservative segment. That's not always true, but sometimes it's true. So if that is even partly true, how do we bring conservatives into the conversation, and meet them in a way that we honor their ideals and beliefs, but still help them to get to the place where they are willing to see, understand, and tell the truth as well, right? Amber says, yes, we have a lot to do as a country. Agreed. Being honest and truthful about our history is a first step. Right. Thank you, Amber, for echoing that. So, I mean, I think for us, like, part of our homework, I think there should be homework for everybody, is, even if, when we think about Reprogram America, each person, like anybody who's hearing my voice or hearing parts and bits of this, or who hears this later after it goes off live, think about opening up these conversations with people who you care about. And it could be your family members, it could be your children, it could be your parents, your friends from high school, um, and listen and hear, like, ask the questions, like, you know, unpack things. Like the workshop I was just in, we started up talking about poverty. That was the first thing. It was about racism, but we talked about poverty. Why are people poor? And we went through this process where one side we were thinking about, the systematic challenges of why people are poor. And then we thought about, we created a person, whether imaginary or real, a real poor person in a situation, in a scenario, that was poor, and that was, holding up a grocery line. And so we imagine, what are people waiting for this person to use their food stamps saying about this person? A woman with full of groceries, and she's using her EBT card. What are the assumptions that people are making about her in the line? And things came up like, she's lazy, she has too many kids, all these assumptions we make that came out of that whole welfare queen stereotype, right? And then we thought about the systems that were created to support or end poverty, and thinking about, what do those systems like support? Like, what do they respond to? When you think about a welfare system that you have to be below or near poverty in order to get benefits, and the moment you get a job, even if it's under minimum wage, you lose all your benefits. So does that promote, you getting a job or coming out of poverty, or does it promote you staying in that place? When you think about, you know, the also the welfare system, or maybe child welfare system, if you cannot bring your spouse into the space, or not your spouse, the father of your children, if he was picked up or arrested, even it was for the wrong reason, and he served time, he can't be in your household and receive your benefits. So it's kind of promoting these broken families. So it's responding, but it's responding to the negative stereotypes instead of the systematic challenges. It's kind of like the way our country works is by addressing symptoms of problems instead of systems. So how do we start those conversations to start shifting the systems? Oh, there's lots of chat. Hold on. Okay, so Erica says, yes, and it's not always so clear a dichotomy. We need to acknowledge that we have to do the work and sacrifice to make some real changes. I would love to hear what that means, Erica. It sounds good. So when it says the work, what does the work look like? Jaquetta, thank you. Jaquetta says progressives and their movement is the next obstacle. There has to be a bridge building with the Liberal Party. Yeah, I think our party system is really messed up, because, Democrats or progressives, Republicans and conservatives, the way we're so divisive, it makes us not able to see how much alike we are. There's so much overlap and similarities. There's so much of the same belief systems that conservatives hold, that progressives also hold, but we're not even willing to talk to each other. So the first step, one of the things I heard in a sermon this morning, Bethel AME, the pastor said, you cannot have righteousness without, you cannot have righteousness without justice. And so when you think about, even in the church and how we separate our churches by race, by, sometimes even political belief system, there'll be a liberal church, a conservative church. We're not able, until we tackle some of these issues around justice, social justice, from both lenses, and find a middle ground, it's not going to work out. It can't be one person loses and the other person wins, because that is not what it is to be American. If we say we want to be exceptional, we have to be united, right? And that means kind of talking to each other. The one trait of narcissism, Dolores says, is that they believe everyone else is the problem. America sees nothing wrong. Right. That's one of the things I was talking about. So the problem with group narcissism is not seeing, when you think you've arrived, you don't have any more work to do. And we have so much more work to do. So being real about that and thinking about what systems do you touch? You may work in education. You may work in, social services, social welfare. You may be a social worker. You may be in the banking space. What systems do you control? All of those systems have an arm that touch poor people, that touch people of color, that touch disenfranchised people. How do you start asking the questions in your meetings, in your spheres of influence, that would challenge and think about how to reimagine the systems that are supposed to support these spaces and groups and places? Jaquetta says, if we are talking about poverty within the Black community, we have to educate our people on this difference between the hood rich mentality, fast money, versus being wealthy. Yes, Jaquetta, that's true. And then you go on to say, we have weaponized poverty as a political stance within our community. Example, bougie versus being real Black. I hear that. We have done that in a way. And I would go even deeper than that. Having people understand the difference between wealth and kind of the hood rich mentality is important, but also talking about the systems that that make it difficult for Black communities to access wealth. So when you think about, our history in even getting a bank loan, even getting all these people who are starting small businesses, COVID has created a space on small businesses where people lose their jobs. They're trying to create something new. They may not have the access or the information to write the same proposal as their white counterpart to get that bank loan. How do we kind of invest and instill that knowledge and support so that they have access to the same money? Also, how do we ensure that the systems are not counting them out? When we talk about even things like hiring, and how you look at resumes and you see people's names, or you see the type of business and like, oh, this is a Black person, I don't know if I'm going to grant this loan, because they might not know how to manage the money, because I have this idea of what Black people are and how they deal with money, right? How do we tackle our system so that even when we do teach them the difference between wealth and hood rich, they have a fair chance to access the funds they need to reach that wealth, right? Um, Erica says, I think the work means acknowledging that we can't pay lip service to the idea of real change. We have to be willing to hear the experiences of others and then, like you said, figure out what's going on with the systems to cause those experiences. And then we have to change the systems, which is not just going to raise people up. It's going to affect people who have privilege, and those people affected need to understand that this may mean sacrifice. Right. That's a good point. Thank you for that, Erica. I think, the work means doing more than talking. But even talking is a stretch for some people. And knowing in whiteness stands a different type of power in terms of who you can reach and talk to. So as you learn, making sure you don't keep it to yourself and you talk to other people in positions of power that can open up access to others, and you challenge them to make sure that they're being fair in their systems, or you challenge them to think about creating new systems that make more sense to support the communities they claim to serve. I was listening to this podcast called Nice White Parents, and it talks about white parents in New York City, and how they can come into a PTA or a community school and completely turn it upside down and change it to fit and mold and address the needs of their white children. So if we took the needs of our community as a whole, Black, white, brown, and think about what are all our needs as a collective, and how do we bring together groups of people to work towards the systematic change. We're the first ones to call, our congressman, our city councilor. When you identify the system that needs to be changed, the policy that needs to be changed, how many people can you rally, you put together to call and start moving towards that? For issues like criminal justice, or education, or equal access to finances, all of these things. I think each of us has the power to tackle it. It just has to always be on our mind, and we can't let the conversation die. We can't get tired of talking about race. I'm tired of talking about race. I got out of a 3-day workshop where all we did was talk about race, but this is our lives. This is the life of my son, my husband, my family. This is my life. And if we don't fight, if we don't open up these spaces to talk and be real with each other and encourage each other to not give up, then it's not going to happen. I think the reason why I get on live is I don't want to sit and think and complain by myself. I don't want to sit behind the Facebook screen and, forward memes or chats or discouraging articles without thinking about how to address some of these issues. I definitely don't have all the answers. I am not a diversity and inclusion expert, but I like to have these conversations because I think they're important, and I'd love to have more. I love to have them with other people. I decided to get on here by myself. It's been a couple of weeks break. I'd really love to have a conversation with a law enforcement. If anybody knows a police officer that would be willing to talk authentically, because I believe law enforcement can only be addressed by law enforcement. They have to work on changing and saving themselves. It can't be outsiders trying to do it for them. Yeah, So that's me. Any other thoughts or questions on this? And again, my little expert excerpt that I read earlier was from one of my favorite books. I finished it already, but I think I'm going to read it again. And it is an Oprah Club book, but it's powerful, y'all. It's well researched, and it really makes you think. And so I encourage you to keep thinking. Your take home homework is to talk to somebody else about group narcissism and what it means in our country and how we make moves to reverse it, so that we know that we can keep doing this work and working on our systems and get their ideas and bring them back and act on them. That's what I'm thinking. Any last comments or thoughts? I hope this was helpful. I think 30 minutes is a good time to stop. I'm glad so many people joined and chimed in. I appreciate y'all. Yeah, let's keep the conversation going. Reprogram America, co-create. This is co-creation. So each of your ideas are valuable and important. And I think if we keep thinking about this, there is no problem that is unsolvable. Even racism, even our caste system. It took 400 years to build, the social construct of race and the arrangement of racism and social hierarchy that we have. And so it's going to take a lot of years to unbuild or reprogram it, right? So it's through each conversation that you have, each thing that you try to build, each bridge you build with people who you don't agree with. Never stand in self-righteousness and say, I cannot talk to this person because I can't believe that they're pro-life, or I can't believe that you know, they like to put Blue Lives Matter. Like you want to make sure you talk to everybody. The people who are the most different from you are the people that you need. It's the most important people to talk to. And the more you can find in common with the people different from you, the more we can kind of move towards this reprogramming and shifting closer to the middle and getting away from being on one side or the other. It doesn't have to be either or. Thank you. Have a good evening. I'm gonna end here. Ciao.